introduce the members of the panel. Danielle Roth Avneri, who is a political correspondent for Maariv. Levy, the head of he's also a commentator in Ynet, and Yediot. I come from Yediot. Okay. Ohad Hemo, who is a correspondent on Palestinian affairs for 12 News, and that's important. And that's it. I am Gilead Sher. I was a member of the delegation, the Rabbi's delegation for the Oslo B talks, head of the negotiation team during the Barak administration. And I would like to just give a little frame this discussion with a few points to begin with, just to even out the playing field here, because people start to forget certain things, including the first person interviewed today here. Let's try to explain a few things here. We're talking about 30 years since the signing of Oslo A, the signing of the Declaration of Principles, which gave the hope and the political horizon and the architecture, going from the principle to the easy, and from the easy to the hard. And after the first Camp David agreement in 1978, the framework agreement between Israel and Egypt. So and the 6 years that followed, between 1993 until 1999, another 7 agreements were signed. The last of which is the Sharm el-Sheikh Memorandum, and they are all together. They're defined as the Oslo Accords. So it hasn't been 30 years since all of those. The most important of those is the interim agreement. That's the heaviest, the most comprehensive agreement, and that's also the agreement that we are still, whose implications we're still living with today. 28 agreement, 220 for an agreement that was supposed to be replaced with the final status agreement. Okay, you also have to remember that during those 30 years, talk of negotiations for final status agreement didn't reach. It wasn't 10% of the time. If you add all the processes that were underway, Annapolis, Taba, Camp David, and then you have at the very tail end of 2013 with Kerry, if you add them all together, that's not 3 years. And when you talk about a permanent status agreement, you're looking at the entire Palestinian-Israeli conflict on a comprehensive way. This is 30 years, and I want to tell you that most of those years were ahead when Netanyahu was in power, when there was a right-wing agreement. I'm going to start here with Ohad. You've been there for 20 years. You've been in the territories, and you've been out there for 20 years. I want to talk to you about the tendency towards annexation versus the tendency towards separation, which was the goal of Oslo. Okay, thank you very much for the privilege. You're giving me the privilege to say a few things here. And I'll put it this way. I think that, first of all, the Oslo agreement is a very important agreement. It's a very important agreement in the sense that there is Palestinian recognition of Israel. It's a mutual agreement, Israel and Palestinians. Even though we're speaking in terms of a major failure 30 years later, many people use that terminology. Ultimately, there was a major Palestinian strategic choice, which was a choice of peace. And we should add that there are many buts here, but if we ultimately look at the broadest frame here, I think that 7 years there was the choice of the strategy of war. But in this sense, there is a dramatic importance here. One more thing that's important to say 30 years later is that one of the achievements is that the fact that Israel has a strategic partner in the territories. If I were to compare the situation today, we've been suffering for the big difference between now and September 2000 is the Palestinian Authority. That's the difference. You're seeing here forces like Tanzim and Fatah. They're all still there. Hezbollah and Iran may be in the backdrop, but everybody's there. The big difference is that the Palestinian Authority, unlike 2000, the Palestinian Authority really did choose to take on to go with the strategic partnership. But when we speak in terms of failure, the big problem is that you can't talk about the Oslo Accords and those who will get around in the Palestinian Authorities. Ultimately, this is a reality of annexation. In that sense, yes, the Accords have failed. I think that, yes, when we talk today, or in Oslo, they were talking about 120,000 Jews living over the Green Line. 30 years later, that number has approached 500,000. And this is part of the issue. I think that the dialogue over two states, which is a dialogue that everybody's having, is almost irrelevant. Anybody going to the territory today is seeing a binational reality. And I think that's the big issue. I feel that it's absolutely horrible, but you have to understand that it's all because of a very, very successful pressure group that declares, these are people they've been a major success. They're a very strong group and they're very efficient. By the way, they're a very small group. Don't get this wrong. And it's taking us, the state of Israel, it's taking us on this adventure that ultimately, to put it lightly, delicately, is endangering our existence as a Jewish country. And we're seeing this in the territories. We're seeing, as I said, a binational reality. And Elior, who's there a lot in the field, you're seeing one set of roads, one set of internet connections. We have everything is intertwined, the imports and exports. Of course, Israel's economy is much bigger, but the Palestinian economy is almost entirely dependent on us. So the trends towards separation that we were hoping to carry out, not just that it's harder to carry them out, but we're going even further into the annexation. You asked for short answers, so there you go. I want to go on with the reality of annexation that you were talking about.
So I would like to continue with this reality that you described that exists today in the media, and usually quite connected to certain identifications. What do you think about the reality? What's your opinion about the continuation of the current state of affairs? Where we're facing? First of all, you touched in your question a few different aspects. First of all, honestly, I admit when Oslo Accord was signed, I was 7 years old, and I hear here all the wonderful experts and my colleagues. There's something very pretentious of actually coming here, and as someone who was actually 7 years old at that period of time, where I am right now as a senior correspondent at the highest rank of the media, but with, frankly, I must say, a little bit of humbleness will definitely hurt. And I heard my colleagues here talking about that, and I learned so much. So I think that the media has a significant and tremendous force, and I thought about that since I was a child, and I think about that until today, and that's why it's important for me to own those leading stages and the leading studios and to present an opinion that is the opinion of the majority of the state of Israel, but in the media it has no representation and not much room. And when I researched and studied as a child, I remember that period of time of Oslo Accord, they asked us to draw paintings of peace and doves, something very pure and very white and wonderful in school, and we had to do that. Later on, I remember that I was also part from the terrorist attacks, and I saw them with my own eyes. And I remember I looked at those doves and those peace accords that came afterwards. And when we're going back into history and we look at the media then, and there's so many books written about that and so many archives, you can say there was only one opinion that actually pushed towards those accords. There was a certain policy that they wanted to promote and they wanted to bring, and no any other voice was heard. The counter opinion wasn't heard, and it came from the opposition, from the demonstrations here during that period of time. But it felt to me that those demonstrations were so small, so insignificant. There were no social networks then. And there were absolutely, if you will find what happens today, they're trying to actually move the cheese. Let's not get into deep, painful political discussion. And there is an opposition on the social networks. And social networks have tremendous and important power to change reality. And they're a political actor. When I look at the last 30 years, that was signed then. Could they actually be ratified now if the public, those people on social networks with this power, bring us to this place? And I think the answer is no. But today those accords failed. We all agree that they failed, but saying that if Should we actually sign that? It's a question we need to analyze really. From the point of time, it's easiest in retrospect to say it didn't work and it didn't succeed and it failed. Yeah, we did sign with a person who was a liar, and they said that very mildly, but I will put it on the table. He was a liar, and yeah, we need to look into it and learn from it. From the other hand, we were a younger country and the world was different and everything was different. Maybe we had some kind of naivety then, and actually burning down this bridge and saying, you know what, okay, we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't try to go forward. It's also not the right way to do it. But I think that today we need to think where it was the right thing, where did we make a mistake and where we didn't. And the feeling is, and I can say as a young child then and someone who is in the heart of the politics, I always feel that politicians will do anything in order to bring political achievements and to claim that they brought those achievements in order to be memorized in the books from the left and the right. They're always looking for perpetuate themselves. This is the most important thing for them, the most central thing for them. They want to be written in history when they're alive or dead, and it doesn't matter what was the price of it. And it's very possible that maybe there was a little bit of a price we paid in retrospect. And in other agreements, future agreements as well, that what will happen. This is the point that we always need to bear in mind where the interests of the politicians are. And in the end of the day, they sign those agreements versus what they actually give us for the safety of the state of Israel and the security.
With regard to the social networks, you more or less took the words right out of my mouth. I didn't say that there was no opposition. This is a very short panel, so we don't have the time to develop that. Social networks could be a tool for creating peace and not just thwarting this type of a process. This is not the panel. Oslo but didn't lead to a situation where we would ultimately separate from the Palestinians. But in any case, I think that when you mentioned the peace and the white dove and so on, is a separation to achieve peace. Is that something that's somehow part of the discourse? That's a question to you, Elior. The Palestinian discourse that you've been following for 15 years. Is it even there? Do you have any anchors to hold on to know that? Because separation at this institute, 10, 12 years. What is the best program for Israel to help it become a legitimate and secure Jewish and democratic state? Every year, when they put out all the different arrangements and plans, it's always a separation and two states. Okay, so first of all, I think that if you're asking about separation, and if you were asking the question in 1993 and during the Oslo Accords, yes, the discourse was about separation and separation under relatively good conditions or reasonable conditions. But today, when you look at the Palestinian Authority, and those of you who have visited there or have gone there, I think that the idea of a separation, or you could call it two states for two peoples, is in a place where it's only the Mukata. It's not even a square kilometer. That is where the announcements come out, talking about two states, a Palestinian state side by side with an Israeli state, whose capital is East Jerusalem. Once you leave the boundaries of the Mukata, you will almost not hear that expression, two states for two peoples. Throughout the past decade, more or less, something that was very marginal, as a very marginal phenomenon, though it now has become quite a consensus in the Palestinians, among the Palestinians themselves, among, by the way, those who were born during this time. In other words, more or less, people your age and people who are a bit younger who don't even speak using the language of two states. By the way, there aren't two states. There are three states. You have Gaza, which is a state in and of itself. There are no two states here. The two states there, they were talking about the Gaza Strip and the West Bank together. That doesn't exist anymore. Nobody sees on the horizon that everything is going to change there. So in the best case scenario, we're talking about 3 states for 2 peoples. Gaza, Palestine, 4 states. You're right. If you add in what's going on in Israel, then we are talking about 4 states. God forbid, God forbid. But when we go back to that, it really does exist that way. There is Gaza and there's the West Bank. If we were to focus on the West Bank, when you talk to the young generation of Palestinians, you're not going to hear their aspirations to achieve a state. You'll hear more of an aspiration that's more global, that's cross-border. They're less interested in whether this land is mine or that land is yours. What their interests are is how many rights do I have? What rights do I have? What personal rights do I have as opposed to your personal rights, individual rights? Today, people look at your Instagram is the center of the world. You see yourself as the center of the world. And that's the discourse that exists today among the young people in the Palestinian authorities. What they're interested in is, why can I now go to the the airport in Israel and within a few minutes go through security? Well, they have to go through a very long, tedious process to go through from the Palestinian side to the Jordanian state, and then go through another security check to go from there to Amman to sleep overnight and then come to the airport. Why are things so simple for us while they're so complicated for them? When they once had talked about 2 states, about establishing a Palestinian state, today they aren't as interested in that. Today they're interested in, why can't Hemo go to the beach with his kids while they can't? And I'm talking about the same sea, the Mediterranean. They're less interested in that. They're more interested in their rights, in their desire to reach a one-state solution is less relevant. The issue here is that there has to be equal rights for them and for us. Now, because this in Israeli discourse doesn't really exist, in the Israeli right that also says we'll give them rights but not equal rights, there is this discourse, there's no peace process, and this discourse can't really persist. So the idea of a separation, that's only in that square kilometer that where Abu Mazen is, and you know that the next 3-5 years, he won't be with us anymore. The question is, what will be the discourse then? Yes, we've gone through everybody. Okay, I would like to just one moment, Yochanan. Now, you wanted to say something. Just one moment. Now, if we have another few minutes, we'll take a few questions from the audience. And Ehud just nodded with his head. And 10 years from today, the Palestinian dispute, are we going to have... Is there any hope there? Okay. So with your permission, in order to... And I agree with everything you said, but I want to talk to you about one event that happened 3 years ago in August 2020. Somebody opens 2 openings, and it's a relatively negligible event, marginal event. Somebody opens 2 openings in the fence near Tul Karam. I was there that week, and what I saw was absolutely incredible. These were openings for vehicles, and the rumor that went around the West Bank was that the army was creating those openings, and what you saw were lots of Palestinians coming into Israel. 200,000 people from Thursday morning until Saturday night came into Israel. 200,000 Palestinians leaving all their savings. A lot of money was left here. Of course, everybody came to the sea, that iconic place. Now, why am I saying this? Because that same weekend, ladies and gentlemen, the Green Line was erased. The truth is that we have not one political, but geographically we're reverting into one entity, which reminds me of what happened what we had up until the first Intifada in '87. And I totally agree with what Elior said, because to my understanding, what we're seeing in the territory, the young generation, the most famous Palestinian poll conductor will tell you that almost 50% of Palestinian young people who were born after the Oslo Accords are talking in terms of one state. Are they Zionist? No, of course not. But they're seeing two very interesting things happening. First of all, they're seeing one state that has always been a paradise, economically, dramatically. The average salary in the territory is 33,900. The salaries in Israel about 9,000. In Israel, the Palestinians will make 10 times more money. Israel is a paradise, and I want to be part of that goodness. I'll continue off where Eli left off. The nationalist inspirations don't really speak to that generation. That's the big. If you go to Hebron or Nablus and Jenin is a bit different, but if you go more into the rural regions, what will you see? You see people saying, "Wait a minute, I don't trust the Palestinian Authority. I don't identify with the PA. Not in Gaza, not in the West Bank, because it's a bad entity. It's a bad entity essentially. There's almost no human rights in the West Bank. There are all kinds of stories about that, which we won't go into now. The economic situation is in shambles. With regard to my mother and father, I'm not talking about, my mother and father were in Lebanon or Tunis. The fantasy was a Palestinian state, but I'm not speaking that language anymore. Just like Elior said, I'm speaking universal language. I want job security in that Oslo equation. I want the very base. I want to be able to go to the beach. I want job security. I want security. I want to make sure. I want to know that nobody's going to harm me. So with all due respect to the Palestinian state, let's set that aside. And this is dramatic, where 50% almost of the Palestinian people, and they don't say this out loud, they still don't. It's still seen as a certain type of treachery, betrayal. It's not really part of the Palestinian media's agenda. But if anytime you talk to a young Palestinian, and not just young Palestinian men, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Well, the future, visible future, at least at that point. Give me a snapshot. Unfortunately, we cannot hear the comments of the audience. Well, go for it, Elior. I'll get back to you. No, you killed me really. So I have 5 more minutes now. Okay, Danielle, what? It's taken the stage after Rolling Stones when Ohad has been here. So, well, first of all, it's extremely moving and microphone. And we had a conversation and I am for 9 months abroad, actually, I have to say, but politically speaking, and let me go on. So we had a political conversation, and I can also relate to your question. I think we will be open here. First of all, we need to solve the disputes amongst ourselves before we do solve disputes with others. And the generation changed, and we feel it not just on the Palestinian side. We see it in Israel, even from the questions that you ask me questions. There's some beautiful questions, and they're full with some kind of color. But today, again, and Elior, you also mentioned that today, I think that the generation of today in other countries, in our generation, we are mostly worried about ourselves. You had this collectiveness, this togetherness, so it's so beautiful, so moving, so exciting. I wish we would have it as well today with the Twitter and Instagram and etc. The things they want to promote and the agendas they had, and they don't really care about burning down their house, and they just want to get what they want. But I do follow the Arabic social networks. If I would have been 7 years old during a court, my daughter today is 7 years old, and she says, I'm watching on TikTok things I've never been exposed to on TikTok from other aspects, and saying how can we even, get to some kind of togetherness. We need to understand also where the world is going to, and to be more realistic. We don't have Yasser Arafat, but there is always other bad guys, and we'd rather know that they're bad and not good, besides actually, trying to shake your hands with Clinton on the photograph, and then it will lead us to this disaster, this catastrophe of Oslo. Well, now it's my turn. Look, if you consider, let's pay attention to, the word peace process is not even coming up in this conversation. The process is before peace. In order to reach peace, you need a process. And this whole narrative of peace process that has been removed completely from the agenda. We don't even talk about that. It doesn't matter what government is at power. When Yair Lapid was a prime minister, ever heard about the peace process? Nothing of that sort. The zenith was an Abu Mazen and Gantz met in Sharm el-Sheikh. It just doesn't exist any longer. And it doesn't exist for a very lengthy period of time because we fell in love in the management of the conflict strategy, economical peace, or whatever you want to call it. The management of the conflict, yes. The worst, really, by the way, in my eyes. Stagnation, that is sanctified. And in the end, you will be surprised. This conflict will emerge, and it already is emerging. That's true, it's already emerging. And what we did see during the last decade, that the Palestinian issue of no interest, because it's very peaceful and quiet. And the moment it's becoming interesting because it's not quiet then. When it's not quiet, they come and say, so why would we give them anything if they're not being quiet? But I think what will happen during the next decade is either we will continue, if nothing is happening, we don't care about them, they're just boring, and we'll meet here in celebrations of 40th anniversary of Oslo, or something will happen. It will be very, very bad, something similar to another intifada, or something of that sort. By the way, pay attention, the intifada is very different from the previous one. This is not the same type of intifada. And if it will happen, it's possible that one will be put in the corner, as during the first intifada. Something will emerge, some kind of attempt of obtaining some kind of political agreement, as Oslo Accords, for example. So I had a conversation with one of the rabbis, very well-known rabbis in Judea and Samaria, and without names, obviously. And he told me in one word, we won. We won. You wouldn't imagine that 30 years after will be 500,000 of settlers and an aspiration of 1 million Jews that live above the green line. Million of settlers, quite a washed up word, we're afraid to say that in the media. Settlers, this is something very realistic, and it will happen even very soon. We won, that's what he told me. There is a campaign at that point, right? There's already a campaign. So, no, I agree completely that the hardcore is there. Unfortunately, 500,000. So, yeah, that's true. The ideological hardcore is not quite significant in numbers, but the idea is to grow them. Settlers' victory will be Pyrrhus' victory, really. And I already hinted that it means that, in fact, there's an actual real danger for us at the Jewish democratic state. This is the big deal. This is the whole story, in fact. A separation of any sort has no any substitute. No any substitute. How and when? Today we talk in terms of a management of conflict, as Elior said, and a bit of a peace of economical nature, and etc. But it just doesn't work, friends. In the end of the day, there is a nation on the other side that is fighting for its freedom, and in the end of the day, they will surprise us. Someone, a wise man, told me once, every 7-8 years, and it does work actually, since 1921. Every 7 years there is an intifada in the Palestinian terms. It's actually true. From 21st, and then 7 years, then the big rebellion, and then 48. Every 7-8 years there is intifada, and the last intifada was also in 2015. And we all know where we're at that point. We cannot call it intifada, but in fact we are in the midst of intifada. Yeah, they just actually dwindle, and they morph into something else. But in the end of the day, where will we be within 10 years? I'm very concerned. I'm very much afraid that things that I heard the man that told me, I'm not sure he is wrong, my ability today to disengage or to disconnect those entwined lines between the Jewish public in the territories and the Palestinians is disappearing. It's almost impossible at that point already. And as far as I'm concerned, this is a message of sorrow, really. It's a horrible message for me. It's a horrible thing. So thank you so much. Thank you.